Welcome to another enlightening episode of The Truth About the Plant, the show that takes you on a journey through the world of psychoactive plants and alternative wellness, all while delivering those real, actual insights you crave. I'm your host, Christina Dees. This is my equally talented co-host, Dr. Amanda Ryman. And Dr. Ryman, you get the honors of telling everyone why we're here. And we brought someone special with us today, too.
We did. I'm so excited because we have one of my favorite people here today as a guest. But the reason that we do this show every week is because it can be so difficult to find real science backed, evidence backed information about cannabis on the internet. Not only is it banned from discussion, even education on most social platforms, but everyone out there thinks that they're an expert. So you can Google a question about cannabis and get 100 different responses. Many of them completely contradict each other. So how do you know what's the truth? Well, that's why we're here. We're here to answer your most pressing questions about cannabis in around 15 minutes so you can get what you need and get on your way. We're going to tell you the truth. So just think of us as your really cool aunties or your kick-ass granddaughters, the women in your life who would never lie.
That's right. And this episode, we invite you to sit back and relax as we journey into the world of cannabis tourism. Today, we're thrilled to welcome a true pioneer in the world of cannabis tourism, Brian Applegarth. As a leading expert and advocate, Brian has been at the forefront of shaping the cannabis tourism industry, blending travel, culture, and these plant-based experiences into something truly transformative. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Amanda. This is someone who's a dear friend of yours, so I'm going to let you do the proper introduction of Brian.
Thank you, Christina. So as Christina said, we are so pleased to have Brian Applegarth join us today. I met Brian years and years ago in California when he was first starting the Cannabis Tourism Association with this idea that as more states legalize cannabis, there's going to be people that want to experience cannabis, but maybe don't live there. They may not have a house that they can go to and consume. They may not know the local landscape, where it's appropriate to consume and where it isn't. And Brian, like myself, kind of comes from the legacy market of cannabis, meaning that we understand that in the early days of medical cannabis in the San Francisco Bay Area, dispensaries served a role beyond just selling cannabis. They were community centers. They were places that allowed people to get together with other consumers. Yes, to learn about cannabis, to learn about safe consumption, but also just for social support, for community support. A lot of early dispensaries offered things like bingo nights and open mic nights and internet access. And so they really were gathering spaces. And let's face it, cannabis is a very social plant. It's the kind of thing that you want to consume and joke around with someone, play a board game, watch a movie. And so thinking about cannabis tourism is really thinking about how do we provide spaces where people can get together to consume cannabis? How do we make accommodations for travelers who may be coming to a legal state and want to experience cannabis? And how do we honor the history of cannabis in places like California, where we have seen pioneers pave the way in order for us to enjoy the access that we have today? All of that is wrapped up in cannabis tourism, and I have just scratched the surface. So, Brian, welcome. We are so glad to have you. And I'm just going to go throw that question out there. What can you tell us about cannabis tourism?
Well, you sure got a good start on it. I mean, it's a really, I think when you think about it in terms of global travel and a global economy, the travel economy globally accounts for about 10.2% of activity on Earth, right? So this is everything from airports to rental car companies to hotels to events to consumption lounges, as well as retail experiences, farm stays, agritourism. At the end of the day, you have the cannabis slash hemp plant, however you were speaking to it, which is one of the most powerful renewable resources on Earth with a deep history in health and wellness, including spiritual health and wellness, as well as treatment biologically and all the science that we now know of. So it's an incredibly flexible, amazing plant that offers a lot of different capabilities. And the way that I look at cannabis and hemp tourism is what are all the intersection points and what's the best version of it as it evolves and becomes more mature and normalized and accessible in mainstream society today, and what destinations are leading the way and what destinations are still trying to decriminalize, And how do we, as like, what's the global lexicon and what's the language we use to talk about in a very factual, authentic way what cannabis tourism is? And for me, it is absolutely experiences that are grounded in wellness and well being. That is the most accurate definition because it really does span into medical travel, where patients, just like people travel to Mexico for a dentist or have to seek out care in certain places, whether it's price or access. Cannabis has that whole side of it, which is true medicine. And then there is the leisure travel side, which are things that are more lighthearted and pairing and playful and board games. And I think right in the middle between the two is the most authentic, factual place of where it lives, which is wellness and well being experiences.
I love that. And I love the idea of thinking about why somebody may seek out cannabis tourism. And as we know, not every state has access to cannabis. And even within states like California that do have legalization, there may be dispensaries that are closer in Nevada than they are for somebody who lives in California. And then there's people that are looking to make leisure plans and they want to travel somewhere and they're saying, okay, what am I going to have as part of this experience? And just like you may pick a place because they have beautiful parks or hiking or skiing, cannabis becomes a part of that. So if I'm somebody out there who maybe lives in an illegal state or maybe lives someplace where my access is spotty or isn't really that quality, what are some of the offerings that exist out there for cannabis tourism? Like what do I have to choose from? What are some of the things that I might be able to plan or engage in?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, the first is to circle the destinations around the world that have the most compelling mature markets, right? Starting with somewhere like Amsterdam, where the coffee shop model has been around since, I believe, the 70s. And it has its own culture and it has a lot of history, including the Bulldog, which they have cannabis hotels and they have souvenir shops and clubs in 4 different countries in Europe. And so it's a very mature market out in there. California, I think, is a really fascinating destination today because one, something you touched on is the culture, right? At the end of the day, travel does tie deeply into placemaking as well as cultural experience, including rituals and symbols and traditions and craft and all these things. And when that's tied to an agricultural product, in travel, we call that a place of source region, where the intellectual capital and the brain trust and the generational knowledge that exists. And when you are able to put yourself in this culture that has such a deep relationship with the cannabis plant, you have life experiences that are transformative and deliver knowledge and education that becomes very valuable, especially when the plant is a tool for improved quality of life if you know how to approach it. So from cultural trails like the Cannabis Trail, which is one of the projects that I've been working on since 2015, cultural landmarks there's 25 of these in California that have interactive QR codes and tell the story, just like a quilt of all the pioneers and communities and how cannabis and hemp have been deeply embedded in the story of California's cultural heritage. And then the next layer coming into play are cannabis farms, complemented by recognized appellations, just like wine AVAs, where they're understanding how outdoor cannabis grows in this Mediterranean microclimate that California, all these different climates California offers. And how does OG Kush express itself different than Harlequin on these slopes in this place? And what does that mean for the soil types and the human energy and the relationship that if it's generational knowledge, there's a different way that those communities relate to the craft of the plant and the knowledge of the plant than somebody that doesn't. And some of these things are very measurable and some of them are more instinctual and kind of understandable without those quantifiable metrics. But this is part of what makes cannabis tourism special is the accessibility to these legacy producing communities, these place of source, as I speak to them, or cultural capitals is another phrase we use in tourism. These rich places where you can have a full 360 sensory experience with deep knowledge around this cannabis craft is a really special opportunity. One other destination I'll mention is West Hollywood. They have really taken the reins on innovating the most forward-thinking cannabis consumption spaces that exist today. that some feel like Michelin star restaurants. When you sit down, you have 4 different menus: a beverage menu, a food menu, a cannabis menu, and then an ancillary menu of what kind of pipes and smoking devices you want to use. And it becomes this multi-pronged experience that you get to kind of self-curate and go on this discovery. And very often these places are extremely beautifully designed, original, just like the cannabis plant's flexibility. You'll have Zen gardens with koi fish. You'll have more of kind of a comedy night vibe atmosphere. I love seeing the cannabis lounges come alive. In my opinion, is a beautiful platform that I'm watching art and performance start to be reinvigorated in a way that's different than alcohol bars. It's almost a cross between the beatnik era and the 1970s and singer songwriter nights, and it's just really, there's a burlesque show at one of them here in the Palm Springs area. So you're seeing all this really all this creativity that so many people already understand go hand in hand with cannabis. And I think the last thing I'll mention, and then I'd love to make this more of a conversation. I feel like I'm on a soapbox.
No, we like it. That's why we have you.
Okay. Yeah. Well, the other thing is, I mean, people, this trend is continuing to catch where people are really associating. They're starting to understand that moment of intention of what cultivar or what varietal of cannabis am I consuming, whether it's a beverage with a limonene terpene profile and 5 milligrams of activated THC within a full spectrum kind of formulation. But people are starting to understand that what kind of cannabis you consume is a primer to the setting you're walking into. So understanding the relationship between using an entheogenic plant like cannabis in the context of mindset and setting within the travel itinerary conversation. Because what do we do on vacation? We see arts and culture. We go grab some local food. We go on nature hikes and soak up the local flora and fauna. And what happens then is cannabis can act as an enhancement tool that brings us into the present and kind of primes the senses for a more rich destination experience and that's a really special place that continues to evolve. I call it effect pairing, but that's a really unique part of cannabis that I think is going to continue to shine.
I love it. So,
Yeah.
I mean, for some people, it's almost like making a pilgrimage, right? Like people that grew up using cannabis, maybe they lived in an illicit market and never had the opportunity to really experience the culture and the legacy and the farm. I know that I was absolutely changed after the first time I went to an outdoor cannabis farm in Mendocino County and met the farmer and saw everything that they put into it. So I could understand for somebody that really appreciates cannabis, but has only been able to experience it on a very superficial level, to be able to make that deep dive and really bring that full circle. Christina, I know you had a question about consumption lounges.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the social aspect because even though cannabis is legal in a lot of states, you still have to be a little bit secretive. You can't smoke in public. And so these cannabis lounges that are popping up provide the space, like you said, for arts and entertainment. And also, you can order food. And so you can try and experiment, and you can also just relax and be social. So can you talk to us some more about the benefits to cannabis consumption lounges?
Yeah, I mean, to kind of echo your point, it's a safe space to consume. So then it's all about what are the different kinds of consumption spaces, right? We call them lounges. I think as an industry, we need to be careful about that because there's so many different types of cannabis consumption spaces, from medical to wellness lounges to beverage bars, and it goes on and on. So, but yeah, as far as the different lounge types, there's one that stands out to me, like the Artistry in West Hollywood, where they really feature local artists. They're as much of an arts and culture attraction as they are a cannabis attraction, in my opinion. And they have multiple lounges at this point, one very close to LAX. Another one is that kind of mentioned it briefly, is that Zen Garden, West Hollywood, where it feels like you walk into an oasis with Buddha statues and waterfalls and koi fish and parrots. And they have an outdoor bar too, with beverage service and coffee and snacks, and they have little cabanas that you can rent, and you can go ahead and get a hookah to share, and very curated, high touch, beautiful. Then you have the more restaurant style, to your point, where it's like a food service, like you're being in a restaurant. One's more of a Michelin star, the other one is delicious hamburgers, that kind of thing. There's a lounge here in the Coachella Valley called Red Falcon, which is indigenous native owned. And they make all their own products from A to Z. So you can go in there and order food. You can order a pre-roll. They have bundled packages on the dispensary side where you can get like the lounge flight package #1. And it's a whole bundled experience when you walk in. And they have a huge screen that people watch football and they're smoking their joint and they're drinking their beer because it's one of those dispensaries because of its native indigenous ownership is able to be more innovative in this way. And so I love seeing these models that are really capturing. Another interesting, the lounges along the trail. I mean, we have, I want to say 7 to 8 different lounges along the Cannabis Trail, each of which have a cultural landmark interactive installation where you can not just read about the history of California, but scan a QR code and watch a short film or listen to a podcast that takes you a layer deeper while you sit in the lounge and smoke your joint. So it gives you an activity to do at the lounge if you feel like it. Spend the hour there and enjoy the product on site. One of my favorite lounges is Plant Shop, which is in southern Mendocino. Yeah. So, Plant Shop it's right at the base of where a longtime intentional community has been. And once you start getting into the history, you'll start understanding the history of these kind of utopian intentional communities, that whole era where there was a back to the land movement where people reconnected with the earth. And anyone who's well-traveled and likes culture, it's such a rich, rich region with beauty in this way because the people have a very strong connection to local community, local artists, as well as the nature locally. And even the words, one of the most special things when I started rediscovering Mendocino as an adult, I went there as a child very young because I grew up in NorCal, but it's just even the language they use and how they speak about things and to each other. They have their own culture that has a lot of beauty built into it because it's a lifestyle that's built very much in harmony with nature. One of the things I really loved about being up in the Emerald Triangle was the way that they celebrate the summer solstice and these agricultural holidays, the winter solstice. I've spent a lot of time living and traveling abroad, and it makes me think of the kava ceremonies in Japan and the green tea ceremonies the kava ceremonies in Fiji, the green tea ceremonies in Japan, and these agricultural ceremonies with reverence that draw out that kind of well-being or that spirituality aspect of that relationship between human and plant and this sacred space of spiritual health. So I think that's one of the most exciting parts of cannabis tourism with the entheogenic activated THC side is this is that new tourism vertical. Of course, all the others that are non-psychoactive or altering, but the ones that have this altering capability, which could be very, very minimal or could be very strong, and there's benefits to both, and there's a time and place for both. But this entheogenic capability, I really do believe that travel vertical of well-being specifically and unpacking what that means with cannabis tourism in a very safe, intentional, and mindful way that fosters a wellness, well-being, and quality of life and encourages laughter, encourages creativity, encourages connection. One of my favorite case studies with cannabis is how the government studied it during World War II as a truth serum, which in my opinion is just another way of saying it helps people open their hearts and connect in a more honest way. So how do we take these kind of ideas and position them for good and make them extremely relatable and accessible in tourism where people can walk away feeling like they've really had an experience that was transformative for the better?
I love that. And of course, I have to give a shout out to Plant Shop because that was my regular dispensary when I lived in Ukiah. And I spent many times in that lounge doing yoga, listening to music, attending events, or even just when I had to get out of the house when we were selling our house and I had to leave with the dogs for a few hours. It was an outdoor lounge. I could bring the pups. I'd get a beverage, go sit in the hammock, and look at the hills. And it was lovely. So I really love them. So Brian, if people want to learn more about the Cannabis Trail, where can they find that information?
Yeah, thecannabistrail.com. And now we have also gamified passports and apps that take it another layer of interactivity. And we're going to be launching bundled seasonal getaways along the trail this year. So really encourage you to follow the Cannabis Trail on Instagram at the Cannabis Trail, all the website, thecannabistrail.com. The other two websites that are live that are going to be really amplified in about 30 days from now is cannabistravelauthority.com, which is like a tourism marketplace with different getaway packages, hotels, things like that. And also the ganjatraveler.com is another website that is very passport heavy. So if you're looking for itineraries where you can kind of curate your own itinerary and it will put it in one document, you'll be able to know what you're doing or where you're going. So those are the three websites that that I'm directly involved with that can help travelers understand this better and find the right trip for them.
And we'll definitely include those links in all the promos for this podcast so people can find that, plan their next trip. I mean, it's so unique and such a great opportunity for folks to experience all the different aspects of cannabis. And, I used to say that, a lot of folks, it's like meat, they've seen hamburger, but maybe they've never seen a live cow. So if you're going to consume cannabis, it's a really good idea to see the plant and to understand where it comes from and to understand the history and to really get to experience it in an environment that is creative and interesting and wellness focused. So Brian, thank you so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate having you. This has been really interesting and it just shows where we're going with this, which is super exciting.
It is.
A lot of times people just focus on dispensaries and I can go to a store and I can buy cannabis, but there's so much more that opens up when prohibition falls. Like the ability to bring this out in the open and really make it part of a lifestyle and part of an experience. So we really appreciate having you on. Christina, do you want to take us out?
Yeah, well, to wrap it all up, from cannabis travel, consumption lounges to ceremonies and retreats, this thriving industry is reshaping travel as we know it. So whether you're dreaming of elevated escapes or just curious about how cannabis is changing the vacation game, I hope you learned something today. So as we wrap up this journey through the budding world of cannabis tourism, remember your next adventure might just be or could just be a green getaway. So a huge thank you to Brian Applegarth for sharing his expertise with us today. You can always share your travel tales with us and explore our cannabis-friendly content at we're over at The Truth About the Plant on YouTube, but you can drop us a line at info@mypersonalplants as well. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to check out YouTube. When you're there, subscribe, hit that notification bell, hit like to stay in the loop. So until next time, stay curious, stay adventurous, and keep your travel dreams elevated. Take care.